All right. Welcome, everyone, to today's series, the Cloud Data Architecture demo. We'll just give it another minute or so until some more folks join. Okay. So just cleaning up my desktop 1 second, we'll get started. All right, perfect. So what we'll do today is just a couple slides on a little bit about Airbyte, and we'll jump into an actual demo. I always love to keep these demonstrations interactive. Might be tough to do with so many folks. So with that being said, if there's any questions throughout, feel free to plug them in the chat. And we'll start it off quickly. Just if everyone watching right now can just go to the chat and just plug in your location, where you're dialing in from, just to like kind of get a sense of who's here today and where we're coming from. I'll start. Island, New York, Des Moines, San Diego, Spain. Very nice. Supposed to go to Spain about 2 years ago, right when COVID hit. Austin. All right, very cool. So with that, I'll go ahead and jump in. So hello, my name is Keith Maxwell. I'm a solutions engineer here at Airbyte. As you saw in the chat, I'm based out of Long Island, New York. I've been in the industry a little over 15 years, both as an engineer and on the sales side. Joined with me today is John Wasserman, his nickname Was. He's in the chat as well. So throughout the demo, if there's any questions, hopefully he can assist in navigating the chat, or I'll try to do a little show and tell as well. All right. So what is Airbyte? So Airbyte is essentially an open source ELT tool. So really focusing on the E and the L. So extracting data from pretty much any of those sources, getting that into your data warehouse, and then leveraging transformations within your warehouse itself. You'll notice that we have an extensive list of connectors, over 350 at the moment, really based on that open source methodology, right? So we have this extensive community. They've helped add to our list of connectors within our catalog. And we are extremely extensible. So you'll notice this little CDK icon in the middle there. So we have the connectors built out of the box, as well as our custom developer kit, leveraging Python and or Java. So on top of that, we also have a no-code builder, essentially future-proofing your business, the ability to connect to any REST API. So it really extends much further than just the out-of-the-box connectors. And on top of that, we do have an extensive API as well. So the ability to trigger those jobs via API, create jobs, things of that nature, which we'll get to in a minute. And then lastly, fair usage-based pricing. So we are essentially volume-based. So it's $10 for a gigabyte and $15 for 1 million rows via API. So very flexible, very easy to consume. And of course, if you're interested in annual commitments, the more data that you use, we do offer discounts. So we encourage you to speak to sales. So before we jump into the demo, just a little bit on how Airbyte was built. So we can kind of get a look at the field before we jump into the platform. So at the very bottom here, you'll see we have a data exchange protocol. This is essentially how the replication works between sources and destinations. That's that proprietary method that Airbyte uses. And on top of that, we have our sources and destinations. So really just need to map your specification for your source in order for it to work in the Airbyte platform. And then we essentially just leverage those existing sources and target specifications to run that replication in the data exchange protocol. Above that, we have our scheduler. So we have a built-in scheduler within Airbyte that allows you to trigger jobs based on an hourly, daily, or even a cron-based schedule. But on top of that, we also integrate with other orchestrators as well. For example, an Airflow. So if you do have an existing orchestrator today, it doesn't have to go away. You can just leverage our API and we can integrate pretty seamlessly. On top of that, you'll see our configuration and our state. This is just the ability to manage multiple accounts within a multi-tenant environment. So understanding which state those jobs are in, the ability to run incrementally. So kind of best practice if you want to run incremental small chunks of data. On top of that, we have our API. So under the hood of what we'll be showing you, pretty much everything is driven via API. So on top of that, we do, as I mentioned, have an API ourselves, an open API. So if you want to trigger those jobs, we call it the concept of powered by Airbyte. So let's just say you bring your own UI. A lot of what we'll be showing you today, you can do via API. So you can create jobs, execute jobs, monitor jobs, things of that nature. And then lastly, what I will be showing today is the UI. But on top of that, if you want to manage all of this via code, we have recently launched our Terraform provider. So you can manage each individual job via code, push that into your CI/CD pipelines. Okay. So before I jump in, I'll just do a quick check on the chat. Looks like Was is already in there. Yes, this will be recorded and we will be sending it to you afterwards. Excellent. Okay. So jump into the platform itself. And sorry, just had to launch a new workspace. All right. So what we're looking at here is Airbyte Cloud. And if there's any open source users today, the look and feel is going to be pretty much identical. What we have right now is this concept of a workspace. You notice that I'm in a shared workspace. This is essentially my 4 walls that I share with other developers within Airbyte. You will have the ability to spin up multiple workspaces, and we'll talk a little bit more about kind of role-based access and control. But right now, this is just a shared workspace, and I'm in my cloud environment. So what we'll do, just start at the settings page here at the bottom. Here is where you can configure access management, so you can add different users to your workspace. You can set up notifications. So if there's anything that you want to be notified on, things like jobs failing, thresholds, things of that nature, you can set up email alerts as well as webhook alerts. So if anyone out there is using Slack and or Teams, just plug in an alert. So if a job fails, you're kind of getting that real-time notification. You can also configure different sources and destinations based on the versions. So if you want to deploy your own custom sources, here is where you would manage those versions, pin them, roll back if you need to. And then with that, I will just jump right into the destination. So what we need to do first is establish a destination, a source, and then configure the two together. So I'll click over here on new destination. And we partner with the biggest and the best. So you'll see things like BigQuery, Snowflake, our certified destinations, as well as all of our community destinations. I think I saw a couple customers specifically ask about Databricks. You'll notice that that is available currently. It does have that community tag on it. We are actively working on certifying that. So that will fall under our support SLAs, hopefully this quarter or early next year. So for this demo, I'll just choose Snowflake. So we're going to land all our data into Snowflake. Our documentation on the right-hand side is going to walk you through how to securely connect, the proper permissions needed in order to create a database, create a table, create a schema, things like that. You will notice that we do, by default, land that data in internal staging. If you wanted to set up an S3 bucket to treat this as a data lake and store that data before you land it in Snowflake, documentation here walks you through how to do that. In order to connect, just plug in your host information, your role, your warehouse, and where you want to land that data. We do support OAuth 2, key pair, and user ID and password in order to authenticate. So I already got one configured. I'll use that in a minute. Moving over to our sources, and I'll click on new source. And as I mentioned, we have over 350 connectors out of the box, some of them certified, some of them community. So for this example, I'll just choose Salesforce. Again, documentation is going to walk you through how to connect. And specifically for Salesforce, all I have to do is hit authenticate. It's going to prompt me with this OAuth 2. And just like that, I've successfully connected. I can click on optional fields. If I wanted to choose a sandbox instead of my production environment, I can do so. If you wanted to get a small set of data, maybe just want to choose about a month ago, you can choose how far back you want to look. And then you can also choose which API you want to use. So if there's large data sets, heavy volume, you can force this to use the bulk API, speed things up a little bit. So with that, I'm going to go over to my connections. And a connection is essentially a pipeline, right? It's going to replicate all your data from your source into your target. I'll click on new connection. And I have my Salesforce connection that I just configured here. This is my Salesforce KRM, and we're going to land this data into Snowflake. So what is happening right now, it is just retrieving all the metadata from my source system. So if it was a relational database, it would be grabbing my schema, my databases, any keys, things like that, maybe relationships. Right now it is pulling from Salesforce, so it's getting all that metadata from Salesforce. This should just take a minute, and I'll just check the chat. Looks like no new questions. And here we have our configuration page. So here I can come up here, give this a unique name. In this case, I'll choose Salesforce KRM to Snowflake, the architect demonstration. And then we have a data residency. So what this is for GDPR compliance reasons, we have the ability to keep this data within the US or the EU. This is essentially where that encrypted data does a pass through the Airbyte cloud instance. From here, we're now just going to configure how I want to join this, replicate this data. So as I mentioned earlier, we have a scheduler. I can schedule this on a hourly or daily basis. If I want to get a little more frequent, I can set this at a cron level, and you can plug in your own cron to replicate this data every 15, 10, or even 5 minutes based on how much volume you're looking at. I'll keep this as manual for now, so we'll kick this off manually. And then moving down the line, we have our namespaces. So a namespace specific for Snowflake would be your schema. So if I hit edit here, by default, you are setting the schema at the connection level. But if you did want to set this at the job level, here is where you can do so. So you can give it a custom format, name your own schema. From there, you can give this these jobs any sort of prefix. So if you want to specifically tag this, maybe SFDC underscore, you can kind of give it a prefix. And then what I love here is that we do auto detect schema drift. So if a new column is added within Salesforce, we will automatically push that change or propagate into Snowflake. With that being said, we have many customers who say, you know what, if a new column is added for governance reasons, we need to pause this job, do some investigation, make sure it passes all our checks and balances. So in that case, I could just give that a quick pause. In this case, we're going to propagate those changes. And moving down the line, we have the concept of a stream. So a stream is essentially a table that will get created in Snowflake. From the source side, if it's an API payload. If it's a relational database, this is a table. Those are streams. So in this case, I'll just choose a single stream, and it's just going to be in my account data. And if you recall, at the connection level, I did set this is just going to be the beginning of the month. I want to get that data. You'll notice now that we have different sync modes. So by default, we've already determined that the best practice would be incremental, append, and dedupe. What that means is we're going to choose the modified date and essentially incrementally load any new data that has been loaded. So the first sync will pull from the beginning of the month. And if I set this on a daily basis, any new data or updated data as of that date will get appended to the end of the table and then deduped based on the primary key. I can choose different methods. So if I want to do a full override, I can do so or append it. And then you'll also notice that my cursor field and primary key are already defined. So the unique value, your primary key, is going to be the ID. And then the cursor field, what we use to determine the incremental updates, is going to be my sys modified timestamp. If I click on this, you can actually drill down to the column level. Let's just say, for example, I don't want to capture my billing address, not important, or maybe there's any sensitive or PII information that I want to deselect. I can do so here. And then coming soon, we are hoping to add additional functionality, things like column hashing, things like that directly out of the box. That's currently under development. So now at this point, what I've done is I've configured my Snowflake database, and then I've authenticated into Salesforce, and I chose my account table, and we're going to run append and dedupe and load that data into Snowflake. So I would come over here, hit setup connection, and within my connections now, I have my Salesforce KRM Data Architect demo. So this I just kicked off just a few minutes ago. At this point now, I can view my job history. You'll notice that it loaded 17 megs. Just under 3,500 records. It has my metadata as well as how much time it took. I can click on these three dots to view these logs. I think there was one question prior to the call that said, can you integrate with Datadog? In short, the answer is yes. So we have documentation on how that works. I think it's in alpha right now, maybe beta, but it's essentially direct integration with Datadog for monitoring. So now at this point, if there were any failures, there would be a notification up here on what that failure is. You could drill down and you can kind of dive into what the logs say as to what caused the failure. Moving down the line, I have my replication. This is all those streams that I've selected or deselected. And I also have transformations. So one thing that we didn't really touch on in terms of ELT is the T portion, right? So all we've done so far is the extract and the load. We grabbed all our data from Salesforce. We've landed that in Snowflake. But now if I want to run transformations immediately after, I can simply add in a transformation and choose which transformation directly from my dbt Cloud account. So within the settings, I'm authenticating to dbt. And then once I do so, all of my jobs or packages are available here. And then lastly, we have our settings. You can change any names, data residency, or just delete it. So with that, all I've done so far is create a simple high-level use case where I want to grab all my data out of Salesforce, land that data into Snowflake. So I'll do a quick pause. We've got a couple questions. NoSQL, Mongo. Yep. Okay. Thank you, Ross. Login message by default. Login methods are going to depend. So for APIs, we'll talk about in just a minute with our builder. Salesforce is OAuth. And then with Snowflake, I think I mentioned there's ID password OAuth too. So really will depend on the source and the target. Okay. Quick time check. We've got about over 10 minutes left. Perfect. All right. So moving down the line, you'll notice that when I did hit sources and I go over to my new source, there are over 350 native sources out of the box. So relational databases, things like Postgres, that's going to offer change data capture or standard incremental. We've got APIs, things like Salesforce, Shopify, right? So there is an extensive list of connectors out of the box. But with any new source these days, they're always going to have an API first approach. So rather than having to find a tool that can connect to this brand new popular API, we have this concept of a builder. And this, what I like to say, essentially future-proofs your business, because any new source with that API first approach, you can connect to and start pulling data in a matter of minutes. All I would need to do is go over here, hit new custom connector. And with this extensive community that we've built here at Airbyte, there may be some other community connectors, YAML files that you want to load. You can import from YAML. You can load from an existing connector, which is an existing API. And lastly, we just start from scratch, which is what we'll do here. So as I mentioned, we're essentially just going to leverage a simple API endpoint, and we're going to create our own custom connection just in minutes and start pulling that data into Snowflake. All we need to do is get a base URL. So any API URL out there, all we want to do is use the base. And what we're going to do is just authenticate so that any streams underneath it or any dedicated API endpoints, we can call immediately after authenticating. In terms of authentication, we support API keys, bearer tokens, standard auth, OAuth, and session tokens. More often than not, you'll leverage an OAuth token. So here you just need to plug in your endpoint, pass in your ID and your secret, and use that in order to authenticate. So for this basic, this is a public endpoint, so I don't need to authenticate. There's no tokens or anything like that. But once we have our base URL down, I'm going to move down to my streams. And if you remember, the streams are the actual API payloads that we want to call. So in this case, all I'm putting is my suffix to this API URL, and I'm going to make a GET call. It's going to authenticate at the highest level and then actually get the data for my user's information. So this user information now, all I have to do is hit test. And it's going to authenticate. It's going to ping this API URL and get all my data in a nice, clean, normalized fashion. Now you will notice the top level here is just my header information, which I don't necessarily need. I don't want to send that data to Snowflake. So we do have this concept of a record selector. And in this case, I just want to get my data object. So here I'll plug in the word data. And if I hit test again, now it's providing me just the data that I need. So now that I've taken a preview of my data, everything looks good. I can start to go into the nitty-gritty or all the details on best practice in extracting this data. I can plug in my primary key. In this case is my ID, which I can potentially start merging on. You can pass in any parameters or headers. So if you want to add in, say, a parameter on country code or email filters, things like that, you can pass that in. We support pagination out of the box. So any of these larger APIs, things like page keys, you could filter on. You can run incremental. So if your cursor, if your payload had something like a last modified date, you can plug that in here. So you can start running any new updates based on that API from that cursor. And then lastly, we also offer partitioning, which in my opinion is the coolest feature here, because in some cases, you're going to want to make a single API call. And based on that data, you'll need to make a secondary call. So here in this case, my ID is maybe a variable that I want to pass into a secondary call. In this case, what I could do is add in a second stream. And then my partitioning now becomes a substream. So the substream is essentially what I want to do to get in this ID. So I would call a second stream. In this case, I would pass this stream here, and then my ID becomes the key. So what you can do is essentially make one call to authenticate, and then from there, make as many calls as you need, and even take the data from one API call and use it as a second one. So very quick, very easy way to do so. So now when I come back to my sources, I'll leave this here. And I'll hit new source. I have all of my custom sources that I've built. In this case, I want to get my custom user data. We'll set this up. Again, it's simply just going to retrieve the metadata from this API. From there, we'll just need to choose a destination. And again, we'll choose Snowflake. One last time, going to hit that metadata, and here we'll start mapping which streams I can select to start running this data. Okay, so here I have the same thing. I'm going to keep this data in the US. We're going to set this to manual. We'll keep everything else by default. And in this case, I just want to get my user's API endpoint, and I want to send that data to Snowflake. Okay, right now it's just configuring the job itself, capturing any other metadata, things like current state, start time, things of that nature. Once this is set, I'll move over to my connections page where I can actually kick this job off, start pulling data from my API, and start landing that data into Snowflake. So while we do that, it looks like Was is answering all these questions, which is great. Thank you. Deploying open source. Looks like Was is doing some more questions than the rest of the users. And don't be shy, people. Any questions top of mind? Looks like we will have a few extra minutes here towards the end, so I'm happy to drill into anything else. All right, so what I'll do is I'll flip back over here. All right, so we've got our custom users into Snowflake. I'll sync this data now. This is going to get any new user data from my API, land that data into Snowflake. We could check out the history of what it looked like last time I ran this. We've got all our logs here, and it was a successful sync. All right, quick time check. We have exactly 5 minutes left. Looks like Was is doing a great job answering any questions. See if there's anything I can show. MongoDB, yep, new certified source. Can we do the T and ELT before we load the data into Snowflake? We submit no data masking yet. That should be coming soon. All right, so this was successful. That essentially concludes the demonstration on Airbyte Cloud. So just want to say thank everyone for joining. I know this is very high level, but really what this, the objective here is just to talk about any new features that have been coming. Things like data masking is on the roadmap, MongoDB, a new certified connector, our builder, which is relatively new on how to connect to any REST endpoint. We would encourage you to leverage this link. You can just simply scan this QR code. It will schedule some time with either myself or Was or some other member of the Airbyte team. We'd love to hear your use cases in a more in-depth environment, ask you some questions, and see how we can partner together moving forward. So with that, I just want to thank everyone for your time. I'll leave it open for just another minute or two for any other questions. If not, I wish everyone a great day and hope to see you soon.